"We're approaching the objective. Weapons ready, but do not fire unless I order it," Redford commanded, and a second later, he was alerted by dozens of quick confirmations. His Talon was, in his opinion, a sorry sight. Incomplete squadrons broke apart the standard grouping of wedges, which, in turn, broke up the wings, and finally gave him a fractured Talon that barely qualified as one with 240 fighters available, and only a few squadrons left behind as reserves just in case they were needed. As a commander, he was used to managing and conducting several dozens of Talons at once in battle. Being reduced to a single splintered Talon was a low point in his career. Or it would be were it not for the circumstances that led him to his current position. "Damn you, Cornelius! Whatever possessed you to commit such betrayal?" he asked himself, wishing he could know that answer. Memories came to him of serving faithfully the previous prince, his friend and liege. Of Cornelius stood next to the prince the day he was crowned, of how out of all the siblings, Cornelius was the one who accepted his demotion with grace and the stewardship of Camrim, forever relinquishing the Astor name and taking the mantle of Draymore with gusto and the deepest honor. "What changed, Cornelius, for you to set your duties and honor aside?" Redford thought bitterly. Setting those thoughts aside, he focused on the task at hand once his sensors detected the plume of the black ship. Oddly enough, it made no attempts to attack or steer away from its current path. "All fighters, form up in a square formation and advance as one," he ordered. Moments later, he watched in his tactical display that all fighters had created a vertical square with only a few hundred meters separating each fighter from the other. It was an effective defensive screen that announced to anyone close by that they were there and that they were ready to attack. If the black ship suddenly fired on them, the formation could easily split apart and move in as a swarm of deadly insects. "Computer, ping them," Redford commanded. "Ping sent. Awaiting a response," the AI replied. Several seconds passed until it spoke up again. "Connection request received. Accept?" "Accept," Redford replied, straightening his back as he prepared to deal with the captain of the dreadful black ship. "Redford, is that you?" Of all the possibilities running through his mind, hearing the voice of Cynthia was not among them. Cynthia, is that you?" he asked, cursing mentally that he allowed his surprise to show, no matter how warranted it was. "It is you, Redford," Cynthia said, relief clear in her otherwise measured, stoic voice. "I'm seeing your formation. Stand down. The Nornavio is friendly." Redford blinked in confusion. "The... what?" He shook his head, dispelling his momentary puzzlement. "You captured that ship? How? When did you... Wait, if you're here, then that means Princess Clara is with you," he asked, hoping to be correct. "Unfortunately, Clara is not with me, Redford. My princess is in Woodshaft," Cynthia replied. "That explains the change in course," Redford commented, frowning. "Why are you aboard that vessel?" he asked more firmly. "I shall explain the details in person, Redford. Board the ship. You can order your fighters to return to the fleet. They won't be needed anymore now that the cowards are in full retreat." "They will be needed more to protect the prince," Cynthia proposed. "Nonsense. If they return, this ship is likely to be their target again. All fighters, break formation. Proceed to form an escort shell around the Nornavio. I can confirm that the vessel is friendly. I repeat, the ship is friendly." A string of affirmative answers coming from the wing commanders followed, and he moved closer to the black ship. "Cynthia, I presume the reason you are on that ship is related to an order given by Clara?" "You assume correctly, Redford. It is by her order and the deal struck between her and Uriel Hoax that I am here alongside a dozen Royal Marines, several captured prisoners, and Lieutenant Wyatt," Cynthia replied. "I will not inquire further until we are standing in the same room, Cynthia. I have visual confirmation of the Nornavio," Redford said, pausing for a moment as his video feed showed the ship in all its deadly glory. "Sweet heavens! That's a stealth ship?" he asked with incredulity. "It has to be as well armed as the Exalted Virtue. More so, if my readings are correct. You're not powering down weapons?" "Not until those things are gone. I do not wish to take any risks," Cynthia replied. "I'll send you the details of the Nornavio," she affirmed. A few seconds later, Redford received the data and went over them several times in half a minute, making sure not a single detail would miss his attention. "Who made the ship?" he asked, unable to form any other words. Further information has been purged. We're flying without an AI. The Royal Marines and I are acting as a bridge between the systems, but it is starting to drain us. We have to make it back to Woodshaft soon, Cynthia replied. Understood. I shall arrive soon. One last question, Cynthia. Redford paused. Nornavio, I was unaware that you had such a sense of humor. That, Redford, is something I cannot answer directly, for it was the command of my princess, Cynthia replied. I shall leave the hangar open for your arrival. The connection ended a second later, and Redford was left both worried and relieved. If Princess Clara was in Woodshaft, then she was at risk just like the prince feared. But at the same time, knowing that the black ship was under the command of Cynthia and that a costly fight had been avoided, eased his racing heart. It took him a few minutes to reach the Noir Navio proper alongside his fighters, who in turn moved to create a sphere around the vessel. He quickly made out the hangar bay open and the protective energy shield keeping any unwanted out. The shield dropped as he entered, only to reactivate a few moments later alongside the hangar bay closing, and the protective kinetic shield dissipated. By the time his fighter was stationed, the hangar was repressurized. Exiting his Raptor fighter wearing an armored suit befitting for a man of his position, Redford looked around the solitary bay and activated the map Cynthia had sent alongside the information regarding the ship's details. Before exiting the bay, however, he noticed a heavily damaged fighter and stopped for a moment, taking note of all the damage it had gone through. It was as if someone put the fighter inside a giant blender for a few moments, then chewed on it, and finally spat it out, he thought, wondering what could have caused such damage. I'll be surprised if that fighter isn't decommissioned, he murmured before continuing on his way. He didn't run. There would be no point in doing so. Woodshaft was still far away, and there was no urgent matter at the present moment that required his attention. Still, his usual calm walking speed was now hurried, his desire to know what happened burning in his chest. It took him several minutes of travel and silent appreciation for the beauty of the ship's architecture, but at long last he made it to the bridge where the Royal Marines stood proudly alongside some crew members wearing Caiston-colored uniforms. The sight of the red-armored young woman eased his heart while she sat on the captain's chair. A ping resonated in his helmet as he accepted the connection. Cynthia. Redford, Cynthia replied before standing up, wires returning to her armor. Turning to face the older man, she approached him and gave him a short-lived hug. It is good to see you again, old man. The sentiment is mutual, Cynthia. Juliana will be relieved that you are alive, unharmed, and that you obeyed your princess's orders, Redford praised, ending the hug. Her surprise will be vast once she discovers that you are not in Woodshaft protecting Clara, I believe. She shall understand given the circumstances, though. Cynthia nodded. Come, follow me. I wish to talk face to face, she said, inviting the commander to follow her. Redford accepted the invitation and followed her out the bridge and down a hallway until they reached the mess hall. Sitting on a table, the two took off their helmets and set them aside. It is good to see that you are indeed unharmed, Redford once again said, relieved. Likewise, Redford, Cynthia replied. What do you wish to know first? Begin from the start, Cynthia. Why are you here? What happened to the crew? I saw no one until I reached the bridge. Why is a Drazan raiding fleet running away? He asked, his gaze stern and focused. Cynthia closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep, calming breath, and told the gray-haired man everything after they arrived at Woodshaft, their reunion with Uriel Hoax, the deal struck, the assault on the Caiston secret station, and the capture of the vessel. Redford took in every detail and word of the blue-haired woman, raising his hand only after she described Samuel's ploy and death. Wyatt executed him without a shred of remorse? Cynthia nodded. He showed no pity, no mercy, no decorum. He treated the Caiston rat as a mere vermin that needed to be dealt with. The commander crossed his arms and frowned. Samuel issued a duel, so capturing him was out of the question. Can't say I wouldn't do the same if I was in his place. A traitor he was, but he was loyal to his house. It is a shame that such measures were needed, he commented. Under any other circumstances, Wyatt would be dishonorably discharged and quite possibly executed for his cold-blooded murder of a high-ranking noble. None other than you, my sister, my princess, and the prince himself shall know the truth. The royal marines and the prisoners shall be censored and dealt with if necessary. Let his death be recorded at my hands, Cynthia replied. Redford studied Cynthia's expression for several long seconds before nodding once. Very well, I shall aid you in this endeavor. If the truth is known, Wyatt would still face recrimination from the more traditional nobles among us. Tell me, Cynthia, why would you risk yourself for Wyatt's sake? What risk is there to take? The duel was issued. I executed Samuel Cayston. The body and that of his crew were disposed of. None shall question a Winfield, she replied matter-of-factly. I understand, Redford nodded once. What about the prisoners? Why were they spared despite Clara's command? Wyatt interfered on their behalf, taking responsibility for their actions. She paused for a moment. He could have easily killed any of them, but didn't. I'm not sure if it was due to a sense of honor or some moral quandary. Regardless, he suspected that they may know of possible sabotage actions or lingering information concealed from us. His suspicion proved to be correct, and we gained access through the system's encryption after a short altercation. Again, he showed restraint and mercy. She smirked slightly. Paradoxical. Redford resisted the urge to pinch the bridge of his nose in frustration. The more I know about Wyatt Staples, the more confounded I am, he said with a sigh. Speaking of him, where is the lieutenant? Cynthia closed her eyes and exhaled slowly before opening them again. Her icy stare softened. Wyatt is in the infirmary. To be more precise, he's in a Medicare pod. Redford was taken aback by her answer. I don't understand. When did he engage in combat to warrant— No, Cynthia, when I arrived I saw a mangled fighter. Did Wyatt fly out on his own to confront the Drazen? He asked seriously, but his tone conveyed the monumental absurdity of what he saw as nothing short of a suicidal idea. Redford! Wyatt is the reason the Drazen fleet was dealt such a terrible blow, Cynthia confessed. What do you mean by that? Redford retorted as he leaned forth. A single fighter can't take down a prepared warship. His performance during the ZTK 990 simulation was one thing, but this is another entirely. How was that possible? It isn't, she replied, because he didn't do it with a fighter. He convinced me that we should use the Nornavio and inflict as much damage to the Drazen as possible to give the defenders a better fighting chance and grant the prince some more time. He left in a fighter to set a trap against any boarding pods and shuttles the Drazen could deploy. I do not understand why he did it. It is hard to interpret his intentions. I believe that he simply wished to inflict as many casualties as possible, no matter how little his contribution was. I can't say I wouldn't do the same. In any boarding action, every able soldier counts, so inflicting as many casualties before they are deployed is a sound tactic, no matter how utterly suicidal the idea of a single fighter preparing an ambush is. Given the state of his fighter, I imagine the trap was unsuccessful. Cynthia gritted her teeth angrily. Yes and no. Redford. I accessed the records of the fighter after placing Wyatt in the pod. He tricked me, she said bitterly. He didn't hide that he encountered Drazen fighters, ruining his plan. But I was led to believe that he fought off 3 or 4 and that the injuries he sustained were minor at best. I didn't inquire further. The older man hummed deeply. Given his skill, I can see him fighting off a squadron of Drazen fighters by himself. The damage I noticed on the fighter speaks of a pitched battle, he replied. Redford, put on your helmet. Let me show you the record itself, Cynthia proposed. Taking her word for it and intrigued about Wyatt's performance, he put on his helmet. A moment later, he received a video feed. The gray-haired man was left speechless when he saw, from the fighter's perspective, how Wyatt Staples dealt with 30 Drazen fighters at the same time, tricking them, using his tactical mind and everything at his disposal to eliminate the enemy as quickly and mercilessly as possible. Impossible. 30 fighters? On his own? Redford muttered, shocked. I knew he had talent, but such reckless abandon, such drive. He obliterated my record in a real fight 3 times over. Taking off his helmet, he set it aside and looked at Cynthia directly in the eye. How did he trick you? He made me believe his injuries were inconsequential. He put on a convincing act that he was lightly wounded at best. Then, I gave him command over the Noir Navio, she said, and watched as Redford's face turned paler than it already was. It was a sound decision, Redford. He made me realize that I was unsuited for direct command and that my strategy was brutish and ineffective. Bereft of options, I granted him temporary command of the ship and engaged in combat against the Drazen. Did you manage to get a reading of the enemy numbers? Redford asked, his voice as cold as a grave stone. 3 destroyer-class and 2 cruiser-class ships. I have safeguarded the footage and the records. They won't be tampered with. The prince and my princess shall be the first to see them. But Redford, trust me when I say this. Wyatt not only managed to disable a destroyer, he also destroyed one of the cruisers. I have the coordinates of the destroyer, too, and the possible vector it took after it was disabled, she said, frowning. After that, Wyatt passed out and I discovered the truth of his injuries. I injected him with 1/5 of a dose of nanogel. I saw no other option to save his life. It worked, barely. He nearly died. That's how... He's a commoner without experience in regards to command, Redford muttered, unable to process what he had been told. The prince... He ordered that I should keep Wyatt close and perhaps develop commanding skills suitable to groom him into a capable aide. Maybe even turn him into an exceptional lieutenant commander given his talent. This changes everything I had planned for him. Redford sighed in exasperation. Cynthia, did I hear right? Nanogel, you injected him with nanogel and he survived? It was 1/5 of a dose, she repeated. Any more than that without the proper implants would have killed him on the spot. In regards to his handling of the ship, he treated the Noir Navio as if he was piloting a fighter, Redford, Cynthia clarified. It was impressive to say the least, and yet I saw a glimpse of him I didn't see before. There was no shame in it either. I do not know if it was due to his injuries or if he doesn't care about letting people see that side of him. She paused for a moment, waiting to see if Redford had anything to say, but the older man seemed to be too engrossed in her recounting to interrupt. After beating the Drazen ships, Wyatt laughed. He reveled in their destruction, Redford. He used trickery and planned around their movements to destroy them effectively. He is, without a doubt, unaware of the rules of engagement regarding ship-to-ship actions, but I'm certain he wouldn't care and would have actively gone against them. He was precise, savage, yet cautious and deceptive. Redford leaned back on his seat, bringing a hand to cover his eyes and rest his forehead for several long, silent minutes of contemplation. This cannot be divulged, Cynthia. A commoner taking command of a vessel has only happened in dire, extreme circumstances of necessity or mutinies. To learn that a commoner inflicted such devastating damage to an enemy force without a proper crew on a captured, advanced ship, the upheaval it would cause among our ranks would be catastrophic. Taking off his hand, he regained his posture. It is fortunate, then, that Wyatt Staples is a man that puts little value in personal glory. Redford, Wyatt has revealed to both my princess and me that glory, honor, and dignity are worthless to him. If my princess or the prince commands him, he will not say a word, nor do I believe he'd seek any compensation for his valiant actions. Her lips curled into a soft, gentle smile. I believe that my princess is correct. Wyatt Staples possesses the soul of a true knight. For our sake, I hope she is right in that assumption. From what I've seen of him, I am inclined to agree with Clara's opinion, he sighed. Perhaps, to him, loyalty truly is its own reward. Cynthia said nothing as she stood up and put on her helmet. Come, let us return to the bridge, Redford. The older man nodded and soon joined her. Report, Juliana, the prince said as he analyzed the carnage that covered the market area of Woodshaft. Dozens upon dozens of bodies belonging to humans and Drazen were scattered all over the place, with human survivors already working on removing the bodies. Around him, 10 Royal Marines created a protective circle, while 2 companies of soldiers and a few squadrons of Marines followed closely. Right behind him, Frederick Anderson, William Hempstroke, and Hannah Talaro followed, armored, armed, and prepared to jump into action at a moment's notice. We've suffered light casualties, my prince. The defenders put up a decent fight and made those bulbous plants pay a high price for every life they took. My troops and Captain Milcades are cornering the last pockets of resistance. We'll get rid of the Drazen in a few hours at the least, maybe a day or 2 at most, Juliana replied, pausing only for a moment before continuing. I have located Princess Clara, and she's safe. Uriel Hoax provided all the security and safety he could spare to defend her. The prince exhaled heavily in relief now that he was certain his sister was safe. "Where's Cynthia?" he asked, worried about his dear friend. "I shall answer that myself, brother dearest," Clara said, her voice invading the otherwise private link between the blue-haired commander and himself. "Impatient as always, Clara. I see that not even the threat of the Drazen can take that away from you," the prince joked. "Shush you," Clara retorted. "If you must know, brother dearest, Cynthia is not with me. I sent her on a mission before this whole mess started. You'll be happy to know that 2 black ships have been captured in short order." "Allow me to congratulate you, Clara. The secrets of such vessels shall be a great boon for our cause," the prince replied. "Nevertheless, sending Cynthia on a mission was foolish, reckless, and stupid on your part. She's your bodyguard. She's meant to protect you, Clara." "I am aware, brother dearest. It was a calculated risk. I did not leave myself defenseless, if you must know. 10 Royal Marines were more than enough to keep me safe until the Drazen showed up." "No one can predict such calamities," Clara replied, her poise and tone unfaltering. "In that case, I shall refrain myself from giving my sister a piece of my mind for neglecting her duties. I can't punish her if she was following the orders of her princess, now can I?" Juliana said, chuckling at the end. "Then that means Redford met her already." "A likely scenario," the prince agreed. Silently, he was glad that was the case. One less thing to worry about was most welcomed. "How many Royal Marines perished in battle?" "4, brother dearest," Clara replied sadly. "Their aid was incalculable. Their sacrifice shall be honored and remembered. Another 7 were severely injured, but they'll recover. They died performing their duties admirably. Nothing more can be expected from them," Juliana added before letting out a short snarl. "I'll personally make sure that not a single Drazen is left alive within this station, if you'll permit me, my prince." "Permission granted, Juliana. Good hunt." Seeing the signal of her sister and his assistant AI creating the quickest path to the command chamber, he proceeded to make his way there. "The prince! It's the prince! He has saved us!" "Royalty? Here? But by the gods, it is the prince!" The prince turned those monsters away. "For the principality, long live the prince!" Grateful shouts began to resonate wherever the prince ventured to, from regular guards to militia and simple commoners holding crude weapons, desperate to defend their lives, called him, honoring him for delivering victory and salvation to them. It tugged at his heart that he had done nothing of the sort. He had planned to save as many as possible and incite the Drazen to leave, not to defeat them in battle. Something else had caused the raiding fleet to flee, and now he was certain Cynthia was the reason. He raised a hand, saluting the poor souls who had endured the Drazen boarding assault and survived the onslaught. Many fell to their knees in reverence, others cried, grateful to have been saved by the Prince of all people. "You should rejoice, my prince. They honor you as they should," said Frederick. "This is your victory." "Is it?" "I did little, and yet they chant as if I had done all," the prince replied, watching as more and more destitute commoners, petty criminals, merchants, smugglers, and more came out of their hiding places to catch a glimpse of him. "And yet, I cannot deny them. They are the people of the principality, misguided as they are. I am their prince. This conflict has brought me here. Tell me, Frederick, would I have ever seen this place otherwise?" "Unlikely, my liege," Frederick replied, his voice weaker and submissive. The prince hummed deeply, choosing to ignore the chanting commoners as he advanced. Soon enough, though, their cries became whispers, and then they were gone as he approached the location of his sister. Upon approach, a series of locks and a reinforced gate opened up to reveal a hidden chamber heavily fortified by automatic turrets and defensible positions. We walked inside the chamber, where a hidden panic room opened, revealing the command center of Woodshaft, and where 4 Royal Marines dutifully flanked Princess Clara Astor, protecting her from all danger. He watched Clara turn to him, and she broke into a sprint. Forgetting all decorum, the prince rushed forth, leaving his escort behind, matching his sister's response and embracing each other tightly. The hug lasted for several seconds until the prince broke it, recovering his dignified posture. "Sending Cynthia away was reckless, Clara. Necessary, but reckless. I'm overjoyed to see you unharmed, he said, smiling behind his helmet. The Drazan, as always, are unwanted, unexpected guests, brother dearest. I knew you wouldn't abandon the innocent people of Woodshaft to die at their tendrils when you could have done something about it, Clara replied, also smiling behind her helmet. They were my secondary concern, Clara. You and Cynthia were my priority. I am, however, relieved that the situation turned in our favor, the prince declared, and then turned to Uriel Hoax, who had maintained himself at a very respectable, safe distance from the two royals. You must be Uriel Hoax. I thank you for protecting my sister, Princess Clara Astor, to the best of your resources and abilities. My pleasure, Your Majesty. I couldn't go and leave her out and about now, could I? Betraying a business partner doesn't harbor good relations, now does it? Uriel asked rhetorically, chuckling to himself. Now I got to see two royals and the prince himself. Guess I'm luckier than most. Thank you, Your Majesty, for coming to help us. Those damn plants were starting to breathe down our necks until your troops arrived and their fleet hightailed it. Due to our current circumstances, I cannot offer you any meaningful reward. Rest assured, once Duke Draymore is dealt with, you shall be handsomely rewarded for your actions, the prince said. Candidly, Your Majesty, I believe that you coming to assist us, a den of smugglers, commoners, and disgraced nobles, balances out whatever reward you may have in mind. The deal struck between your sister, Princess Clara, and me is more than enough to ensure the prosperity of Woodshaft, my home, for decades to come. Granted, if you win, he chuckled again. I will throw my lot with you regardless, my prince. I am at your service. If that's your decision, my dear Uriel, then shall we finalize our deal? We shall remain here for some time to make sure every Drazan is dead and to load the promised goods and ships, Clara said, stepping forth. But of course, Princess. Allow me a moment of respite, however. The defense of my station left me drained, and I would very much enjoy a glass of whiskey and a cigar. Victory always makes things better, Uriel said, bowing his head slightly before making his way to a hidden cabinet. Left with relative privacy, Clara turned to her brother and opened a private channel with him. Come, brother dearest, I have something to show you. The scanners were able to pick up the fight between the Noir Navio and the Drazan fleet, and more than that. The Noir what? He muttered, flabbergasted. You recorded the battle? The prince asked, unamused. With a motion of his hand, his escort stepped back, giving them space. You expected me not to? Oh, brother dearest, it was a thrilling, captivating experience. It may be limited to scanner data, but the sentiment is unparalleled, dreadful and suspenseful, but truly brilliant. Wyatt has exceeded my expectations tenfold. To think he could command an unknown type of destroyer vessel in such a manner, she exclaimed giddily. Wyatt? The prince repeated his name in a murmur. I thought Cynthia was the one commanding the black ship. Trust me, brother dearest, I love Cynthia and trust her with my life, but she knows nothing about naval command. No, I am certain it was Wyatt who sat at the captain's chair during that frenetic engagement. Regardless of my opinion, we will know what transpired once they arrive. She then clasped her hands. I hope the ship's systems were able to record the battle. I would love to add that to my collection. To have a first real account of such a marvelous ship in full display in combat? It may not be a fighter, but Wyatt made it dance like one. I am transfixed by his abilities, and I am going to reprimand him harshly for his idiotic, reckless behavior. The princess took in a deep breath to calm herself, crossing her arms in exasperation. In the meantime, brother dearest, do you plan to pursue the Drazan? She asked with a serious tone. We won't be able to catch them before they jump out. Suits me well. That was my original plan, to force them out of the fight. Drazan raiders are opportunistic cowards, the prince said with disdain. Let us leave those thoughts aside. I am eager to see your recordings, Clara. It may answer some quandaries of mine. Wyatt opened his eyes slowly as the darkness that had welcomed him so gently became nebulous and distant, slowly replaced by stinging light. He closed his eyes at the assault, but opened them again after a few seconds of struggle, now welcoming the white light shining above him. His vision was blurry, but it rapidly improved until he could clearly see where he was, still strapped to the bed inside the Medicare pod. The only real difference was that now he could move his head freely. He opened his mouth and suddenly felt rather thirsty. He tried to talk, but his throat ached and lingering pain rocked throughout his body. My neck is killing me. Why does it itch and feel like my skin is peeling off at the same time? Wyatt thought as words failed him. How long have I been asleep? Did we win? Those damn monsters better be dead. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a Royal Marine standing near the entrance of the infirmary and was looking at him. Even with his helmet on, he could feel his icy gaze set on him. The sensation was uncomfortable, and it sent a shiver up his spine. I'm so lucky that I won't get to fight a Royal Marine. Then again, I would be dead before I knew it happened, he thought, momentarily remembering the butchery just a handful of Royal Marines and Cynthia caused within moments. A few minutes passed that felt like an eternity to the bedridden pilot until the Royal Marine moved out of the way, allowing the doors to open and the now familiar sight of Princess Clara and Cynthia entered his field of view. Okay, Wyatt, play it cool, play it coy. I only took command of the Nornavio for a few minutes in a desperate situation, and a high-ranking noble gave me that permission. Granted, Cynthia isn't part of the Royal Navy, but her word carries weight, I hope. Oh, who am I kidding? I'm so dead, Wyatt thought nervously as he managed a weak, strained smile when the two beautiful women stopped next to his pod. My pre-ac... Wyatt tried to speak normally, only to end up coughing repeatedly. After a few moments, he calmed down enough and lowered his volume, making his voice sound raspy and dry. Excuse me, Princess. No need to apologize, Wyatt, Clara replied, her expression soft and caring, purple eyes set upon the bound man. I imagine you're thirsty? Very much so, he confessed, ashamed. The Medicare pod is keeping your body properly supplied with nutrients and water, Wyatt. What you're experiencing is one of the secondary effects of the nanogel I injected you with, Cynthia explained, breaking her stoic expression to smirk softly at him. You would be dead otherwise. Nanogel? Wyatt muttered, and his face paled. He knew how expensive nanogel was, not to mention it was reserved only for high-ranking nobles. That was enough to nearly knock him out again. Commoner, you wasted on me? He rasped with difficulty. I believe that your victory over the Drazen is more than enough reason for you to earn at least that much, Wyatt, Clara said, eyes narrowing. Her smile dropped and her expression shifted from friendly to the cold, serious face she had used when dealing with Uriel. So much for playing it safe. I feel like her eyes are going to choke me, Wyatt thought, unable to look away from the vibrant purple eyes of the blonde princess. Drazan? He managed to squeak out, unable to gather the courage to say anything else. Clara sighed, and her expression relaxed somewhat. Gone. They jumped out of the system 6 hours ago. The last pocket of those monsters was exterminated an hour ago. They died at the hands of Juliana. Now that brought a smile to his face. For all it was worth, to know that the Drazen had run away like cowards and the borders had been exterminated made all the pain and transgressions worth it. Would have liked to kill the rest, he muttered, satisfied. They were too far away, and while we had the strength to do it, we would have taken casualties. We simply lacked the numbers and the firepower to confront them in open battle, Clara answered. Drazen raiders are parasites. They only attack targets they are sure they can assault with little trouble. Were it not for the Nornavio and your crucial efforts, Wyatt, I'm afraid the outcome would have gone according to their usual raids. Wyatt grimaced internally, knowing full well what that entailed. Nevertheless, he was pleased to notice the disgust and venom that laced the words of the princess he'd started to respect. I only did what I thought would be the best way to deal with them, he replied. Do not fret, Wyatt, Clara continued. You shall not be punished in any regard. My brother has seen the records as I have. Only a few of us will know the truth of what happened and the circumstances that led to it. I trust that you will not be disheartened to know that your achievements commanding the Nornavio will be occluded. Wyatt shook his head slowly. Not at all. Loyalty is its own reward, he said, pronouncing the ancient motto of House Astor and that of the principality itself. Cynthia shall receive the credit for your accomplishments, Clara stated, her expression hardening as she placed a hand on the glass of the pod. The pilot turned his gaze to Cynthia and observed her expression for several moments. She was impassive, but her eyes flickered with respect and gratitude as she stared at his immobile body. It was only then that he noticed that he was no longer wearing his armor. In fact, he was only wearing a pair of medical shorts to cover his privates. He blushed and looked away. He was no stranger to nudity or showing his body. Communal showers had that effect, but to be basically naked and helpless was another thing entirely. "Not at all. Clara," Wyatt replied, correcting himself at the last moment, but still unable to look back at the two women. "Excellent," said the princess, barely managing to suppress a giggle due to Wyatt's bashfulness. She couldn't help herself. "I must admit, my dear Wyatt, that you are far less muscular than I thought you'd be. Toned yet lean. Except for your chest and upper arms," she giggled. "Nicely developed biceps, triceps, and pectorals," she said in a teasing tone. "Goodness gracious, Clara," Cynthia breathed out, embarrassed at her friend's antics. "Can't a princess appreciate the attractiveness of a well-developed body?" Clara retorted, never losing her playfulness. "Is this what it feels to be behind a butcher's stall?" Wyatt wondered, as he felt particularly exposed, like a slab of meat being grated by potential customers. "I'm glad to see that no lasting injuries will persist," Clara said, her tone returned to normal. "Now then, Wyatt, would you explain to me what were you thinking for you to decide to go on your own in a fighter?" Wyatt's embarrassment died swiftly after hearing what she just said. His heart raced, and he slowly turned only to find her friendly expression, but he could feel the pressure behind her otherwise friendly smile. He looked at Cynthia, only to find a similar expression and a glare that promised him retribution would come. Great. So lying or downplaying it are no longer valid options. All that's left is to tell the truth. Things can't get worse, can they? Wyatt thought and gulped nervously. Cornered and quite literally unable to get away from them, he confessed why he had decided to go out in the first place and why he lied to Cynthia. When he was done, he heard Clara sigh in frustration. "Of all the irresponsible, thick-headed, idiotic decisions I have heard in my life, you are close to the monumental list of records I possess, Wyatt Staples. I understand your reasoning and motives, but what you did was not only downright moronic but highly suicidal," Clara declared with a frown. "Not only that, Lieutenant, but then you had the gall to lie to me. You put your life needlessly at risk, and then you covered up the extent of your wounds. Had I known the extent of your injuries, I would have never given you command of the Noir Navio. You almost died, Wyatt. Your heart stopped moments before you were put in the Medicare pod. You being alive right now is nothing short of miraculous. Do you have a death wish?" Cynthia reprimanded coldly. Clara pointed at him with disapproval. 6 broken ribs, left lung punctured, cerebral hemorrhage, internal hemorrhage, over 3 dozen linear and hairline fractures across your body, a concussion, and countless microfractures. Your Dulaxis implant was also heavily damaged and will need replacement, she listed angrily. "Why did you put your life at risk so brazenly, Wyatt? I saw the way you fought and then commanded the ship first through the scanners on Woodshaft and then directly through recordings. Do you care not about your life?" Wyatt was momentarily stunned. Despite the harshness in their voice, he could detect a hint of hurt and worry for him. Nobles, one belonging to a prominent house and the other true royalty, both of them blue bloods as blue bloods could be, showed concern for him. The list of his injuries was not surprising. He remembered the pain, and were it not for the adrenaline and the stimulants his armor gave him, he would have passed out much, much earlier than when his injuries overcame his stubbornness. "I'm a commoner," he rasped. His voice was quiet, submissive, and direct. He had stated a fact as true as if he'd just said that fire was hot or that ice was cold. "You shouldn't care. My life has no value," he said, gritting his teeth. Anger, pain, and sorrow flowed freely within him. He wanted to stop, but he wasn't in his right mind at the moment. "Nobles use our lives as disposable things. If my life can save many more, I have no regrets." The expressions of the two women softened after hearing his explanation. Clara looked away for a moment, ashamed, while Cynthia clenched her hands into fists. "Don't you want to live?" Cynthia asked, taking a step forward. "Don't you wish to see your parents and siblings again, Wyatt?" "I do," he replied sincerely, "but my life is worthless compared to yours." he rasped again, smiling at her devoid of anger, resentment, or jealousy. "I'm a commoner. I can't do great things. I don't seek to. All I can aspire is to have a decent, simple life and live it in peace. I'm a commoner. I aspire to nothing more than what I can reach." He turned to Clara, giving her that same smile. "I live to serve. That's my only worth. Loyalty is its own reward. But to who and to what?" I don't care anymore if I spoke out of line. Damn, it feels good to just let it all out. They are good blue bloods. No, they're good nobles. I'm pretty sure I just insulted them somehow. Perhaps Dad was right, but I have no regrets except for making Mom cry so needlessly. I killed many Drazen and I saved many lives. What more can a filthy commoner hope to accomplish? If I'm to be executed for speaking my mind, I'll gladly accept it, Wyatt thought, relieved and fearless. Then, why did you become a pilot if you wanted a simple life, Wyatt? Clara asked softly. He blinked. My answer remains the same. The stars call to me. I like space. I love piloting. I wanted to serve the Principality, Clara. It is my duty, he replied with utmost sincerity. Then you spoke truthfully, Clara said. Wyatt, I can't give you the reward that you so rightfully deserve. Not now, at least, but know that I, Clara Astor, see you as a trusted friend. Please, for the sake of your family, if for no one else, don't throw your life away and stop seeing yourself as a mere tool that a noble can abuse and disregard whenever they want. What about the countless others toiling away under the boots of nobles who sell them out to save their skins? Who uses them as so much ammunition or resources and nothing more than that? Would you say the same things to them that you are saying to me? Wyatt wanted to make that snide remark. He knew he was being treated preferably due to him saving her life not once, but potentially twice now. She felt indebted to him, but he also knew that she wasn't like most nobles. She cared about the lives of those under her. A fool he was not, because at the end of the day, as long as she survived, every other death didn't matter. It wasn't fair. It wasn't just. But he knew why her life mattered more, and he held no ill will toward the purple-eyed princess looking at him. She didn't deserve his scalding tongue. I'd die for you willingly, my princess, Wyatt replied, stunning both women. Your life is worth more than mine. You must live. And stop Duke Draymore. The Principality isn't perfect, but it is my home, and I will fight for as long as I can to defend it. My family. You. And the prince. He offered her a caring smile. How can the life of a mere commoner compare to the life of a princess? Stop pushing yourself down this instant, Clara remarked, smacking the glass with an open hand. Why do you insist on seeing yourself like that? Next to her, Cynthia gave her friend a sad look before turning to Wyatt once more. I know my place, Wyatt replied before focusing on Cynthia. Just like Cynthia knows hers. Then he returned his attention to the princess. The difference lies in the roles we play. Each of us lives within our prisons, gilded or ironed. It matters little. Clara wanted to object further, but having her own words used against her in such a manner managed to disarm her. It shouldn't be so, she mumbled after a few seconds of silence. But it is the truth, Wyatt replied softly. Clara, may I ask something? The princess nodded. What will happen to Galt and the prisoners? Their fates have been sealed and are within my hands after you delivered them unto me. Rest assured they won't be killed. Their service was noted and appreciated. For most of them, at least, Clara answered, using her diplomatic tone. Wyatt, Cynthia told me what you said about the Drazen. Her eyes softened when she saw him freeze for a moment. Taking her chance, she studied his body closely. Aside from a few scars and short hair across his arms and legs, there were no marks of lashes, deep cuts, or any evidence across his body that spoke of him being mistreated or punished by overtly cruel local nobles. She wasn't too surprised by that after seeing his performance at the mess hall. His body was pristine in most regards, except for the most striking scar that ran across his left side. It was like a gash that healed poorly and left pinkier tissue over his ribs. It wasn't even that big, perhaps 10 centimeters across, if that, but it was an old wound. Nothing truly remarkable. Wyatt closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and turned to Cynthia. I promised you that I would tell you about my experience with the Drazan. He turned to Clara while a fire raged in his chest. Do you wish to know why I know what they do? Please, Clara said firmly. He snarled. Obey. Camram, capital world of House Draymore.
Duke Cornelius Draymore, the self-proclaimed regent of the Astorian Principality, walked upright wearing his officer's uniform and a long green cape flowing behind him as he advanced through the luxurious hallways of his mansion. Servants bowed before him in respect to their liege. His shoulder-length blonde hair shone against the rays of the sun, his short beard was elegant and properly trimmed, and his green, intense eyes fit perfectly against his stoic, unmoving expression. He was tall, a hulking man standing at an imposing height of 6'12" with broad shoulders, exceptional physique, and aristocratic elegance. The mature man was the epitome of what a noble should look like, and he radiated power, wisdom, might, and charisma. Behind him a group of guards walked diligently, ready to protect their liege at a moment's notice. Duke Draymore's walk ended minutes later in front of a sealed room with guards posted at each side. They saluted and stepped aside, giving him full access to the closed doors. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice deep yet cordial. A quick salute from all his guards was all the confirmation he needed before opening the doors. Stepping inside, he was greeted by the familiar view of a lavishly decorated room. Paintings of marvelous scenes hung on the walls. A vast, comfortable bed rested on the other side of the ample bedroom that could easily be used to house a large family of commoners. The carpet was made out of the finest materials, the same as the priceless desk, closet, clothes, curtains, shoes, and every other square inch of the room. Duke Draymore closed his eyes and breathed in deeply as he closed the door behind him and moved to the balcony where a figure sat on a chair. The closer he got, the figure became distinguishable, and soon the figure of his son, looking so much like himself when he was at that age, came into view. His son was reading a book under the protective shade of a parasol, while treats and tea rested on the table nearby. His son didn't react to his presence, not even when he sat down. The Duke watched as his son continued to read, ignoring him. After 2-page flips, he cleared his throat. "Gabriel," Duke Draymore began, "have you changed your mind?" "Fuck you," Gabriel said, closing his book and setting it aside. He turned to face his father, eyes flickering with disgust and hatred. "Is that enough of an answer, traitor?" Cornelius hummed deeply, crossing his arms but showing no hostility toward his son's words. "Gabriel, please, I'm no traitor." Gabriel scoffed. "Says the man who nearly killed his nephew, the prince, captured most of his other nephews and nieces, and keeps them locked who knows where. Says the Honorable Cornelius Draymore, who instigated a coup and placed himself as regent. Says the man I once admired and was proud to call my father." He spat at his father's face, each word full of vitriol and hatred. "And not content with that, you trapped me here." The Duke didn't dodge his son's spittle. He merely pulled out a handkerchief from his pocket and cleaned it. "You are not a prisoner, Gabriel." "Oh, really? You cut me off from the network. I don't have any servants. I'm guarded at every moment. I can't leave past the territory of your mansion, and no one is allowed to talk to me," he scoffed. "It is so reassuring to know I'm not your prisoner, traitor." The Duke stared at his son for long moments, then replied, "Where would you go if you could leave?" "I would search for the prince or any of my cousins that managed to escape your clutches and join them against your coup, traitor." Gabriel spat, his green eyes showing nothing but contempt for the man in front of him. "The fact that Veronica decided to follow you like a blindly loyal dog disgusts me." "She knows what loyalty is, Gabriel," the Duke replied. "Unlike you, my son, Veronica is committed and supports her father wholeheartedly." Gabriel scoffed. "Devotion isn't the same as loyalty, father," he said, impregnating the last word with all the spite he could muster. "You know as well as I do that she'd do anything to gain your favor. She sees you as infallible whilst I know better. I see you for what you truly are. To be young and delusional, the Duke replied with a chuckle. Tell me, Gabriel, what am I? A vile, treacherous man who spat on all the vows he made. A man without honor and who knows not the very concept of loyalty. I see a traitor who wishes to usurp a throne that doesn't belong to him, Gabriel replied, glaring at his father. You are a power-hungry maniac who will lead the principality into bloodshed just to slake your thirst for power. Were Mother to live to see this, she'd slap some sense into you. For I fear you've lost it all, traitor scum. You are so much like my dear Jasmine, Gabrielle, the Duke said before reaching inside his uniform to pull out a handgun. He placed it on the table and leaned back on his seat. If you truly believe I'm a traitor. Duke Cornelius Draymore didn't get to finish his sentence and was interrupted by a loud bang. Then another and 17 shots more until the magazine was empty. Impassive and collected, he stared into the burning eyes of his son, Gabriel, and found only resentment, shame, anger, and contempt for him in his green eyes. The gun kept clinking, now empty of ammunition. Angrily, Gabriel tossed the weapon at his father. The handgun bounced off to the ground while the shimmer of a shield enveloped the Duke. The older man reached down to grab the handgun and stored it away. That's the difference between you and me, traitor. I am loyal to the prince. I am loyal to the principality. You stopped being my father the moment you plotted against the prince, my cousin, your nephew. That's why you never told me anything about your demented plan until you executed it. Did you tell Veronica? Did she know? Gabriel scoffed. Duke Draymore, despite the attempt at his life, smiled. Your resolve is as strong as ever, my son. Your false loyalty is commendable but foolish, Gabriel. Veronica didn't know, just like you, and yet she stands at my side. But do not be mistaken, my son. I do this not because I crave the throne or power. I do this because it must be done, and no one else has the strength to do so. Gabriel sat down and grabbed his book. It just so happens that the other traitors that follow you will have much to gain and earn your favor if you win in the end. You, above all else, of course, shall benefit the most. Opening his book where he left it off, he leaned back on his chair. If you have nothing more to say, leave. I can stomach breathing your insufferable stench for so long, traitor. Do not assume that I will cave and bend the knee before you, father. I care not if you threaten me with exile or if you reject me, stripping me of the Draymore name. He smirked. But you won't. I'm too dangerous for you to just send me away. You will have to kill me or keep me locked up forever. The Duke stood up. I will come back when my duties permit me, Gabriel. Don't be foolish, my son. See reason. Your cousin is unsuited to be the prince. It would make me immensely happy for you to join me. Veronica misses you dearly. You're a terrible liar, Gabriel said, and then put his attention back to his book, ignoring his father once more. The Duke sighed heavily and left his son be. Before he left the room, he sent one last glance at him and felt a hand squeezing his heart for a moment. Shaking his head, he took a deep breath and strengthened his resolve. He exited his son's room and closed the door behind him. To his surprise, Marquis Hadrian Tigan, the head of House Tigan, and older brother of Admiral Cornelius Tigan. Marquis Hadrian, I was not informed of your coming, the Duke said as he began to walk down the hallway with Hadrian next to him. Like most Tigans, Hadrian's hair was black and his skin was olive-colored. His eyes, gray and cybernetic, still showcased the wisdom of the older man. Being a head shorter than the Duke, Hadrian glanced up before replying. I came here on my own volition, using the ship you so generously provided me with, your lordship. It is my sincere hope that it is serving you well, Hadrian, but I doubt you've come to my home just to say hello. What has happened that you couldn't rely upon through our network? The Duke asked, raising an eyebrow in curiosity. The Vulture's pride has come back presenting severe damage to its outer hull, breached during the altercation. It was forced to retreat, Hadrian said. The Vulture's pride. That's the ship that set after the royal favor in pursuit, the Duke stated. How was it damaged to the point it retreated? Hadrian sighed heavily and frowned deeply. Apparently, and pardon my following statement, but it is the truth, a garbage hauler threw its cargo at it and ignited the container as a makeshift bomb. He explained with disdain. I have already punished the inept fools responsible for such a blunder. The Duke had to take a moment to absorb the information. After processing it, he couldn't hold back a hearty chuckle. A garbage hauler? I would like to meet the pilot who managed to do such an absurd thing a possibility. That's not all, I'm afraid. I exchanged several messages with the Castons, and they informed me that their turncoat confirmed the presence of both Princess Clara and the prince himself, alongside a ragtag fleet of ships loyal to House Astor. Hadrian said, not bothering to mask his contempt. It would seem that they failed to even delay the prince significantly, let alone attempt to capture the prince and Princess Clara, or eliminate them outright. The Duke stopped, and his expression hardened. Are Redford, Damien, and Juliana among their numbers? Hadrian nodded curtly. Then he resumed his walk. Proceed. Nothing else has been reported, your lordship. I received the last update yesterday before my arrival. We will not know more for another week. Maybe more if Tamir Caiston tries to cover up his failures like usual. He sighed in exasperation. I do not understand why you tolerate his incompetence, your lordship. His son, Andrew, would make a much better head, and I know him personally. Unlike his father, he is vastly superior in every regard, a capable subject worthy of the many gifts you bestowed upon their house. Tamarin may leave much to be desired, but House Caiston has always stood next to House Draymore. I value loyalty, the Duke replied. I thank you for the information, Hadrian. Now I know where my nephew is headed. He will need time to gather forces, even with the full support of Marchioness Amelia Finnegan. Which brings to mind, have you quelled the uprisings on your territory? Most of them, your lordship. Do you wish me to strike at House Finnegan? Hadrian asked, eager to prove his worth. First, we shall consolidate and attempt to lure neutral houses to our cause. I do not wish for this conflict to devolve into a civil war. I may be regent, but my title holds no power as long as the prince remains free. Or alive. Either way, we shall be victorious. I need you to continue your strikes against House Valto and House Winfield. Keep them guessing and on edge. Do not allow them to consolidate their forces and come to the aid of the prince. The 1st, 4th, and 7th fleets are taking refuge among the houses loyal to House Astor, but they are scattered and disorganized. Hadrian nodded. It shall be done, your lordship. However, may I ask, should we divert forces to systems at risk of Drazan incursions? The Duke closed his eyes. Only those who are loyal to our cause shall receive protection. The rest can fend off for themselves. The loss of life will be regrettable, but the tragedies shall incur discontent and resentment among House Astor supporters. Those losses shall grant us further favor. It will demonstrate that we are better organized and can mobilize faster in response to any threat. My decapitating strike failed. Now we play the long game. Hadrian bowed his head. As you command, your lordship.